Introduction. Those who know that they are profound strive for clarity. Those who would like to seem profound strive for obscurity. That's from Nietzsche. Philosophical essays may have many different structures. For experienced writers, the choice of a structure is often neither difficult nor even conscious. The essay seems to write itself. For inexperienced writers, the choice is often tortured or seemingly impossible. I offered this book to the later group of people, of which I was member of for more than 3 decades, and rather than survey many possible structures, I have concentrated on what I think is the simplest, most straightforward structure that a philosophical essay might have. My purpose is to help students write something valuable so that they might begin to develop their own styles. The project is similar to teaching art students to draw the human hand. The first goal is accuracy, not intelligence. Elegance. Elegance in writing is not learned. It is a product of a kind of genius, and genius begins where rules leave off. The topic of this book is something that can be learned: how to write clear, concise, and precise philosophical prose. Elegance is desirable, but so is simplicity, and that is what I aim for. The philosopher Avram Stroll once said, "Half of good philosophy is good grammar." This remark is witty and profound, and like any good aphorism, difficult to explain. Before I try to explain at least part of what it means, let me forestall a possible misunderstanding. Although good philosophical writing is grammatical, there is virtually nothing about grammar in this book in the sense in which your fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Grundy, discussed it. Virtually all students know the rules of grammar, and yet these rules are often flagrantly violated in their philosophical prose. Why does this happen? One reason is that philosophers often try to assign things to their proper categories, and those philosophically contrived categories are not clear, or at least they are initially hard to understand. Philosophers have sometimes divided reality into the things that are mental and the things that are material. Sometimes they have divided reality into things that are substances, things that exist on their own, and things that are accidents, things that are properties or depend upon other things for their existence. There is even a grammatical correlation between these categories. Nouns correlate with substances, man with man, and adjectives correlate with accidents, rectangular with rectangular. When philosophers argue that things that seem to belong to one category really belong to another, grammar is strained. Most theists maintain that God is just, but some theistic philosophers have maintained that this cannot be true. The reason is that if God is just, then God has a property of being just. And if God has a property, then he is not absolutely simple or one and might therefore be corruptible. So these philosophers have said that God is identical with the just, or that God is identical with justice. Even though these latter claims stretch the grammatical limits of most natural languages, sometimes the attempt to say something new and correct about the limits of reality causes the grammar to break down completely, as when Martin Heidegger says, "Nothing, nothings." The noun nothing cannot be a verb, so the pseudo verb nothings is unintelligible. Further, Heidegger seems to be construing the word nothing as a noun, as if nothing named something, when obviously it cannot. Of course, Heidegger would disagree with my grammatical remarks, and that is just one more reason why philosophy is difficult. It is hard to get philosophers to agree even about grammar. Thomas Hobbes was one of the first to discuss the propensity of philosophers to mistakenly combine words that belong to one category with words that belong to a different and incompatible category. This is known as a category mistake. Roughly, a category mistake is the logical equivalent of mixing apples and oranges. The sentence colorless green ideas sleep furiously involves several category mistakes. Colorless things cannot be green or any other color. Ideas cannot sleep or be awake, and nothing can sleep furiously. Objects belonging to one of these categories don't fit with objects that belong to some of the others. One of his examples is the intellect understands. According to Hobbes, the intellect is the name of an accident or property of bodies which is one category, while understands, even though it is grammatically a verb, is the name of a body, humans, which is another category. And thus he holds that the sentence, the intellect understands, is literally absurd. What Hobbes thinks is literally true is the sentence man understands by his intelligence. In a related way, John Locke thought it was a serious mistake to say the will wills or chooses. What is true is a human being wills or chooses. It is quite possible for someone to disagree with Hobbes about whether the sentence the intellect understands makes sense or not, and to criticize the philosophico grammatical view that underlies his grammatical judgment. Philosophers often disagree about what is absurd and what is not. Consider the sentence believes our brain states. Does this sentence express a category mistake or a brilliant insight into the nature of the mental? Philosophers disagree. So it is not always easy to say whether some philosophical thesis constitutes a great philosophical insight or a laughable grammatical blunder. Thus, added to the inherent difficulty of philosophy is the difficulty of philosophical writing, which often groans under the burden placed on syntax and semantics. Another reason that students often write patently ungrammatical sentences is that the philosophy that they have read some seems that way to them. And it seems that way because the thought being expressed is radically unfamiliar. Since philosophers often invent categories or concepts that are unfamiliar to students or revise familiar categories, there is no place for the category in the student's initial system of thoughts, and it is hard to adjust one's concepts to make room for the new or revised category. Often, the category will be initially situated in an inappropriate place, or the wrong things will be placed in it. In a word, the category is strange. As a consequence, when students come to explain, criticize, or even endorse propositions using that category, they may produce incoherent and ungrammatical sentences. Their writing, though muddled, is an accurate representation of their understanding. This is nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be proud of either. It's just part of the process of learning to think philosophically. If you find yourself writing a sentence or paragraph that is grammatically out of control, then your thought is probably out of control. Consequently, you can use your own prose as a measure of the degree to which you understand the issue you are writing about and as an index to the parts of your essay that need more consideration. I owe the ideas in this paragraph to Charles Young. This explanation of why half of good philosophy is good grammar inspires a partial criterion. Good philosophical writing is grammatical. If a person can write a series of consistently grammatical sentences about some philosophical subject, then that person probably has a coherent idea of what he is discussing. Another related criterion of good philosophical writing is precision. Contrary to the conventional wisdom prevalent among students, vague and verbose language is not a sign of profundity and astuteness but of confusion. Teachers of philosophy who are dedicated to the above criteria in effect issue a challenge to students write grammatically, clearly, and precisely. Since language is the expression of thought, clear language is the expression of clear thought. Writing style should facilitate the comprehension of philosophy. Style should enhance clarity. If half of good philosophy is good grammar, then the other half is good thinking. Good thinking takes many forms. The form that we will concentrate on is often called analysis. The word analysis has many meanings in philosophy, one of which is a method of reasoning. Another meaning refers to a method or school of philosophy that reigned largely unchallenged for most of the last century. Many, feel, many people think that this method is passe in our post-analytic era. I'm not taking a stand on that issue in his book. I use analysis in a very broad sense that includes both analytic in a narrower sense and post-analytic philosophy. The goal of analytic philosophy, as it is understood here, is the truth presented in a clear, orderly, well structured way. I take a strong stand for clarity, order, and structure. The goal of analysis, in its broad sense, is to make philosophy less difficult than it otherwise would be. This is just a corollary of a more general principle. Anyone can make a subject difficult. It takes an accomplished thinker to make a subject simple. Philosophical writing has taken many forms, including dialogue, Plato, Berkeley, Hume, drama, Camus, Marcel Sartre, poetry, Lucrece, and fiction, Camus, George Eliot, Sartre. I will discuss only the essay form. There are three reasons for this decision. First, it is the form in which you are most likely to be asked to write. Second, it is the easiest form to write in. Third, it is currently the standard form for professional philosophers. Although the dialogue form is attractive to many students, it is an extremely difficult one to execute well. It tempts one to cuteness, needless metaphor, and imprecision. It is often advisable to preview a book. That advice holds here. Skim the entire book before reading it more carefully, depending on your philosophical background. Some parts will be more informative than others. Chapter 1 discusses the concept of author and audience as they apply to a student's philosophical prose. Both students and their professors are in an artificial literary situation. Unlike typical authors, students know less about their subjects than their audience, although they are not supposed to let on that they do. Chapter 2 is a crash course on the basic concepts of logic. It contains background information required for understanding subsequent chapters. Those who are familiar with logic will breeze through it, while those with no familiarity with it will need to read slowly, carefully, and at least twice. Chapter 3 discusses the structure of a philosophical essays and forms the heart of the book. The well worn but sound advice that an essay should have a beginning, a middle, and an end applies to philosophical essays too. Chapter 4 deals with a number of matters related to composing drafts of an essay. Various techniques for composing are discussed. Anyone who knows how to outline, take notes, revise, do research, and so on might be able to skip this chapter. Chapter 5 explains several types of arguments used in philosophical reasoning, such as dilemmas, counterexamples, and reductio ad absurdum argument. Chapter 6 discusses some basic requirement that the content of an essay must satisfy. Chapter 7 discusses goals for the form of your writing, coherence, clarity, conciseness, and rigor. Chapter 8 discusses some standard problems students have with the first few pages of an essay. Chapter 9, new to this edition, makes suggestion about how to read a philosophical essay. Numerous appendices cover such topics as research, how to study for a test, what sources on the internet are appropriate for a student to use in a glossary. Like essays, most books have conclusions that either summarize or tie together the main strands of the work. However, it would have been artificial to do so in this case, since the book as a whole does not develop one main argument but consists of a number of different topics that should be helpful to the student. Appendix A, it's Sunday night and I have an essay due Monday morning, is included for those who bought this book but never got around to reading much of it and can serve as a conclusion. Several of my students who used one of the first three editions let me know that this was the first part of the book they read on a Sunday night about 6 weeks into the semester. In order to survey the needs of a wide range of students, the level of difficulty varies from elementary to moderately advanced. Even within individual chapters, the level of difficulty can vary significantly. Although each section begins with the simplest material and progresses to the most difficult, thus a chapter on a new topic might revert from complex material in the previous chapter to a simple level. I believe that intelligent, hardworking students can move rather quickly from philosophical innocence to moderate sophistication. At various points, I have presented fragments of essays to illustrate a stylistic point. The topics of these essay fragments are sometimes controversial and the argumentation provocative. These passages are meant to keep the reader's interest and do not always represent my view. It would be a mistake to focus on the content of these essay fragments when it is their style that is important. Also, it is quite likely that the reader will disagree with a few or even many of the stylistic claims I make. It just leads readers to at least think about why they disagree and to discover what they prefer and why. Then a large part of my goal will have been achieved. Chapter 4 contains a section, the rhetoric of philosophical writing, going back as far as Socrates. Rhetoric has often had a bad name in philosophy. No negative attitude toward rhetoric is implied in this book. Rhetoric, as I use it, contrasts with logic and refers to style, that is, to those elements of writing that facilitate communication. The right kind of rhetoric in writing is not antithetical to logic, rather, the right rhetorical elements are important. After all, like an essay, a philosophical essay that fails to communicate fails in one of its central purposes. Philosophical writing is intended to be practical. It is supposed to help you write better and thereby improve your ability to present your thoughts. Since almost any class may require you to write an essay that analyzes some kind of concept, the skills gained in learning to write about philosophical concepts may prove useful in writing other types of essays. A problem faced by English speakers who wanted to avoid language that favored male human beings is less severe now than it was 40 years ago, because many clear headed writers have suggested various ways to avoid the problems. Here are four excellent ways. Delete the pronoun. A professor should prepare, omit his lectures well before they are to be given. A controversial suggestion is to use they with anyone, someone, and no one. That is, these sentences would be counted fully grammatical. Anyone who fails their exam will be permitted to take a makeup exam. If someone is tortured for a long time, they will eventually suffer a breakdown. The objection to this practice is that it is illogical. Since anyone, someone, and no one are singular, this should not be paired with a plural pronoun. I once argued this way myself. I have given it up because I think eventually plural pronouns will be used with singular universal pronouns. Excellent writers in the past have used plural pronouns in this way, and language is a matter of convention. When for one reason or another I have found it convenient to use generic pronouns that are grammatically male or female, I have used the following conventions.